The kingdom of Montebello awoke under a sky streaked with the hues of dawn. The golden light spilled into the busy slums where Isabel lived. As she completed her daily household chores, the warm morning sun touched her pale skin and her icy blue eyes sparkled with every splash of water as she stomped on the fabric soaking in the wooden basin. Despite her humble beginnings, Isabel embraced her life with gratitude, which was a fruition to the lessons her mother had imparted. Although Isabel was uneducated, she was wise enough to find joy in the simple things and never grumbled about their status in society's hierarchy. Her appreciation for her mother's sacrifices was boundless, that she often expressed it in songs of love and gratitude during times of scarcity. Her father was a subject shrouded in silence. A past her mother, Teresa, never spoke of, and Isabel never pressed. She understood enough to harbor a deep, personal hatred for the pain her existence had caused her mother. Yet, in her mother's eyes, there was no hint of resentment but only endless love and devotion for her daughter. "Isabel, dear?" Teresa's sweet voice broke through her thoughts, bringing a smile to her face. "Yes, Mother?" Isabel responded, looking up from her task. Teresa approached, holding a bundle of blankets. "I thought you were almost done. I need these washed as well. Winter is coming." Isabel nodded as her hands immediately moved efficiently. "I shall take care of it forthwith. Are you heading to work now?" "Yes, dear. The pub shall be busy today," Teresa replied. "Indeed? Is there a celebration of which I am unaware?" Isabel asked as her curiosity piqued. Teresa chuckled, patting her daughter's shoulder. "One of the soldiers who frequents the pub is to be wed. The men are celebrating." "That is wonderful news," Isabel said with a smile, kneeling to pick up a clothespin. Teresa watched her daughter fondly. "One day, when you marry, your ceremony will be grander than all." Caught off guard, Isabel stumbled, earning a laugh from her mother. "Mother, please. I do not wish to marry. I desire only to remain by your side." "Goodness, Isabel. Life is lonely without a family of your own. You are my gift, the reason I rise no matter how many times I fall." "Do the same when you are a mother," Teresa said, her voice filled with affection. Isabel nodded, although her heart resisted the idea. All she desired was a peaceful life with her mother, to give her the happiness she deserved, even if it meant sacrificing her own. "Nevertheless, it is your life to decide," Teresa added playfully. "Though I do need someone to boss around." "Mother," Isabel retorted with a laugh. "I shall be off then." "Take care," Teresa said, kissing her daughter's forehead before leaving. Isabel watched her mother go and took a deep breath before returning to her chores. The courtyard where she worked was alive with the sounds of the slum's children playing, vendors shouting, carts clattering on cobblestone streets. By midday, Isabel had finished the laundry and moved on to other tasks. She swept their small living space, tidied up the sparse furniture, and prepared a simple meal for her mother's return. As she mended a tear in one of Teresa's old dresses, a knock at the door startled her. She immediately stood up and opened the door to find Mrs. Hawthorne, their kind elderly neighbor, holding a loaf of fresh bread. "Good afternoon, Isabel," Mrs. Hawthorne greeted warmly. "I baked too much this morning and thought you might like some." "Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne," Isabel replied gratefully, inviting her in. As Mrs. Hawthorne stepped inside, she glanced around the tidy room. "You have been busy. How fares your mother?" "She is at work, putting in extra hours," Isabel explained, setting the bread on the table. Mrs. Hawthorne nodded with understanding in her eyes. "Your mother is a strong woman. And you, Isabel, are growing into a capable young lady." Isabel blushed at the compliment. "I do what I can." The afternoon wore on with Isabel and Mrs. Hawthorne conversing through various topics, from the latest news in the kingdom to tips on managing a household. The elderly woman's presence was comforting, which reminded Isabel that even in the midst of hardship, there were still moments of kindness and community. Eventually, Mrs. Hawthorne took her leave, and Isabel returned to her mending. The rhythm of the needle and thread was soothing, and it allowed her mind to drift. She thought about her mother's words earlier that day. The notion of marriage was foreign to her desires, yet the conviction in her mother's voice made her wonder if there was more to life than the simple existence she cherished. As the sun began its descent and casted long shadows across the courtyard, Isabel rose to prepare for her mother's return to ensure the small meal she had prepared was ready. Just then, the door creaked open and Teresa stepped inside with her face weary but lit with a smile at the sight of her daughter. "Welcome home, Mother," Isabel greeted warmly, taking her mother's cloak and hanging it by the door. "Thank you, dear." The pub was indeed busy today, Teresa said, sinking into a chair with a sigh of relief. "I have prepared a meal for us," Isabel announced, bringing the simple fare to the table. The two ate together and shared stories of their day. As they finished their meal and made sure nothing was left on their plates, Isabel hesitated before speaking. "Mother, you spoke of marriage this morning. Do you truly wish for me to marry?" Teresa looked at her daughter thoughtfully. "Isabel, I wish for you to have a life full of love and companionship. Marriage is one path to that. However, what I desire most is your happiness. If remaining by my side brings you joy, then that is enough for me." Isabel nodded as her heart swelled with affection. "Your happiness is my greatest concern, Mother. I will think on your words." Isabel, who was ever observant, notices the weariness etched in her mother's eyes. "Did you manage any rest at work?" Isabel inquired, her voice laced with concern. "Very little," Teresa admitted, "but I don't mind. It is heartening to witness such joy and celebration." Isabel nodded and felt relieved that her mother found comfort to her hard work. "I finished the laundry and tidied up." Mrs. Hawthorne stopped by with fresh bread. "That was kind of her," Teresa said with her eyes brightening. "Mrs. Hawthorne always looks out for us." "Indeed," Isabel agreed. "She also gave me some advice on mending clothes. I believe I am improving." Teresa smiled, gently squeezing Isabel's hand. "You are doing wonderfully, Isabel. I am immensely proud of you." Isabel blushed. "Thank you, Mother. I just want to ease your burdens." "You do more than enough," Teresa assured her. "I am grateful every day for you." "How was your day, dear?" "It was good. Busy, but I like to stay occupied," Isabel replied with a smile. "I had some time to think as well." "Oh." Teresa raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About the future," Isabel said softly. "And how much you mean to me." Teresa's eyes shimmered with gratitude. "You mean the world to me, my dear." As the two finished their meal, Isabel began clearing the table and stacking the dishes neatly on the table. Teresa joined her and helped carry the empty plates to the sink. As she lifted the dirty dishes, Teresa suddenly gasped and faltered. "Mother!" Isabel cried, rushing to her side as the plates crashed to the floor. She immediately guided her mother to a chair as her voice trembled. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" Teresa's face had drained of color and her breathing became shallow. I do not know," she whispered, wincing. Isabel's heart raced. "Just breathe, Mother. I will get some help. Stay with me." Teresa nodded weakly while her eyes were filled with worry. Isabel ran to the door, calling for help into the night. Spotting a familiar neighbor's candlelit window, she rushed to it, knocking urgently onto the door. As the door creaked open, it revealed Mr. Jenkins with his face creased out of concern seeing Isabel all worked up. "Isabel, what is wrong?" "It's my mother," Isabel blurted out. "She's in pain. I do not know what to do. Mr. Jenkins promptly grabbed his coat and lantern without hesitation. Take me to her, he said firmly. Isabel led the way back to their small home while her heart pounded with fear. As they arrived inside, Teresa saw then and managed a weak smile at Mr. Jenkins. Thank you for coming, she whispered. Mr. Jenkins knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. What happened? He asked, his tone calm and reassuring. I suddenly felt a sharp pain in my chest. I could hardly breathe, Teresa explained, struggling through the pain. Mr. Jenkins nodded with his brow furrowed in worry. We need to get you to a doctor, he said. Isabel, help me get your mother ready. They carefully assisted Teresa to her feet and supported her as they made their way through the night. Upon reaching the clinic, the doctor, seeing the emergency, quickly assisted them inside to assess Teresa's condition. Within minutes, his face grew grave. It is serious, he said quietly. Your mother has suffered a heart attack. Isabel felt panic surge through her as the doctor continued, she needs to be hospitalized and start medication immediately. Isabel's heart sank. Being one of the people who live in the slums, they barely made ends meet. The thought of affording medical treatment seemed insurmountable. I am sorry, doctor, Isabel said, her voice small. We do not have enough money. Are there any alternatives to treat her while I look for the means to earn? Mr. Jenkins placed a comforting hand on Isabel's shoulder, his expression sympathetic yet determined. We will find a way, Isabel. The doctor nodded. I will start the necessary treatment. We can discuss payment plans later. Right now, your mother's health is the priority. As Teresa was settled into a hospital bed, Isabel stayed by her side, holding her hand. Isabel whispered a silent prayer, vowing to do whatever it took to save her mother. Isabel spent the night at the clinic, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. The room was quiet except for the occasional murmur of the doctor. As dawn approached, Mr. Jenkins, who had stayed as well, approached Isabel with a gentle expression. You should rest, Isabel. You've been up all night, he said kindly. I cannot leave her, Isabel replied, her voice resolute. She needs me. Mr. Jenkins nodded in understanding. I'll stay with her. Just rest in the chair for a while. You'll be no good to her if you collapse from exhaustion. Reluctantly, Isabel agreed. She settled into the chair beside her mother's bed while her head rested on her arms. Despite her worry, the exhaustion soon overtook her, and she drifted into a light sleep. A few hours later, Isabel awoke to find the doctor speaking quietly with Mr. Jenkins. She quickly stood as her heart pounded with anxiety. Doctor, how is she? The doctor turned to Isabel, his expression serious but hopeful. Your mother is stable for now. The immediate danger has passed, but she will need ongoing care and medication to prevent another attack. Isabel nodded as relief flooded through her. Thank you, doctor. What must we do next? She will need to stay here for a few days for observation, the doctor explained. After that, she will require regular checkups and medication. As the doctor left, Isabel sat down again, holding her mother's hand. Just then, Teresa's eyes fluttered open, and she gave her daughter a weak smile. Isabel, you look exhausted. You should rest. I am fine, Mother, Isabel said in a soft voice. I was so worried about you. Teresa squeezed Isabel's hand weakly. I am sorry to have caused you such worry. But I am so proud of you for staying strong. Tears welled up in Isabel's eyes. I just want you to be well, Mother. We will find a way to manage the expenses. Isabel returned from another long day of searching for work, but nobody seemed willing to hire someone like her who is skilled only in household chores. Downhearted, she trudged home with the burdens of rejection slumped on her shoulders. As the late afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Isabel decided to visit the small clinic where her mother had been temporarily confined. She took a deep breath and smiled, hoping to bring some comfort and cheer to Teresa. Isabel entered her mother's room quietly, with the soft rustling of her skirts the only sound. Teresa stirred as her eyes opened slowly. She immediately shifted and smiled to the sight of her daughter. "Good evening, Mother," Isabel whispered, leaning down to kiss Teresa's forehead. Teresa spoke weakly. "Good evening, my dear. How did your day fare?" "I managed," Isabel replied in her gentle voice. "How do you feel?" "A bit better," Teresa said, her voice still frail. "But very tired." Isabel nodded. "You must rest and regain your strength. The physician said you need to stay here for a few more days." As the two conversed, the door creaked open and Mrs. Hawthorne entered with a warm smile, carrying a basket. "Good evening, Teresa, Isabel," she greeted them. "I thought I would bring some fresh fruits and a bit of news." "Good evening, Mrs. Hawthorne," Isabel replied, rising to take the basket from her. "Thank you for your kindness." "It is my pleasure," Mrs. Hawthorne said, setting the basket down. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thanks to all of you," Teresa replied. "Your kindness has been a blessing." "We are a community," Mrs. Hawthorne said warmly. "We look out for each other. Isabel, if you need anything, do not hesitate to ask." Isabel thought for a while, remembering Mrs. Hawthorne's words. "Actually," she said with a hopeful tone, "what news do you bring?" Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes sparkled. "Ah, I received a letter from an old friend who still works at the palace. They are in need of new maids, and I thought of you, Isabel. With your skills and demeanor, you would be perfect for the position." Isabel felt a spark of hope as she asked, "The palace?" "Truly?" "Indeed," Mrs. Hawthorne confirmed, handing Isabel the letter. "My friend has assured me that they are looking for diligent and trustworthy individuals. You would have a chance to earn a good wage and provide for your mother." Tears welled in Isabel's eyes as she looked at her mother. "Mother, do you hear this? It is an opportunity we cannot miss." But Teresa's smile instantly faded, replaced with a look of concern. "The palace is a place fraught with risks, Isabel. The nobles can be unforgiving, and a mistake might have severe consequences, even the loss of one's life." Isabel's enthusiasm dimmed as she considered her mother's words. "But, Mother, what choice do we have? This opportunity could save us." Her mother sighed as her eyes were filled with worry. "I know, my dear. But the palace is a different world. You are innocent and kind-hearted, qualities that might not protect you there. I fear for your safety." Yet, Mrs. Hawthorne interjected gently. "Teresa, I understand your fears, but Isabel is strong and capable. She will learn and adapt. The palace can be daunting, but it also offers a chance for a better life." Isabel nodded and took her mother's hand. "Mother, I promise to be careful. I will do my best to learn quickly and avoid mistakes. This is our chance, and I am willing to take the risk for us." Teresa looked deeply into Isabel's eyes, seeing the determination there. After a moment, she nodded reluctantly. "Very well. If you believe this is the right path, I shall support you. But promise me you will be cautious." "I promise, Mother," Isabel said, squeezing her hand. "I will be careful." Mrs. Hawthorne smiled with relief evident in her eyes. "You are a devoted daughter, Isabel. Your mother is fortunate to have you. Remember, you are not alone. We are here to help." And so Mrs. Hawthorne leaned forward while her voice took on a tone of urgency as she began discussing the details. "Dear, you must seize this opportunity. Tomorrow, you must present yourself at the palace with this letter, Mrs. Hawthorne instructed, handing Isabel the parchment bearing the official seal. Isabel's heart fluttered with excitement and apprehension as she accepted the letter. But what should I say? How should I present myself? Mrs. Hawthorne smiled reassuringly. You need only show them the letter. It is an invitation to work as a maid at the palace. They will guide you from there. Isabel nodded as she listened intently. And what about my mother? I will stay with her, Mrs. Hawthorne assured her. You focus on securing the position. We shall manage things here. Gratitude flooded Isabel's heart as she realized the depth of Mrs. Hawthorne's support. Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne. I shall not forget your kindness. It is my pleasure, Isabel, Mrs. Hawthorne said, patting her hand. Now, pack your things and rest well tonight. Tomorrow is a new beginning for you. The next morning, I woke early and dressed carefully. I chose my best attire and packed my few belongings into a small bundle. Today was the day I would travel to the palace, carrying the letter that could change mine and my mother's lives. With my bundle in hand, I made my way to the small clinic where my mother was recovering. As I approached the room, I saw Mrs. Hawthorne already there, attending to Mother with her usual kindness. Despite all the hardships we had faced, I couldn't help but feel the overwhelming gratitude. Even in these dire circumstances, we were blessed to have people like Mrs. Hawthorne who cared about us and were willing to help. Good morning, I greeted softly, stepping inside. Mrs. Hawthorne looked up and smiled warmly. Good morning, Isabel. You look ready for your journey. I am, I replied, though my voice trembled slightly. I turned to my mother, who was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than before. Mother, I came to say goodbye before I leave, I said and took her hand in mine. She squeezed my hand while her eyes were filled with both pride and concern. My dear Isabel, the day has come. I know this opportunity is important, but the palace is a world so different from ours. I understand, Mother, I replied as I kept my voice steady with determination. But I must do this for us. This opportunity could be the chance we need to change our lives. Mother sighed with her eyes softening. I know, my dear. Just promise me you will be careful and wise in your actions. The palace can be treacherous for those who do not tread carefully. I promise, Mother, I said, leaning in to kiss her forehead. I will be cautious and mindful of everything I do. And I will come back to visit you as soon as I can. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on my mother's shoulder. Do not worry, Teresa. I will look after you while Isabel is away. We shall manage together. Mother nodded, grateful for the support of her friend. Thank you, Mrs. Hawthorne. Your kindness means so much to us. Finally, I stood up, took a deep breath and gathered all my courage. I must go now. The journey to the palace will take some time. Mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Go with my blessing, my dear. You have always been my strength. May fortune favor you and keep you safe. I gave her one last hug, trying to keep my tears to myself, and held her close for a moment longer. I will make you proud, Mother. I promise. You already have, she whispered. As I finally pulled away from the hug, I could see the tears welling in her eyes. It was a moment filled with emotion, and I felt my heart twist painfully in my chest. I gave both her and Mrs. Hawthorne a respectful bow before walking out of the clinic, knowing I was leaving behind the two people who cared for me the most. When I made my way, the reality of my departure hit me hard. My eyes stung with unshed tears as I stepped onto the path leading to the palace. I had no means to pay for a carriage or a horse, so I began the long walk with only my thoughts for company. Each step seemed heavier than the last, laden with my burdens and my worries and fears. While I trudged along, I couldn't help but think if I was making the right decision. I thought if it was right to leave my mother when she needed me the most. But then, the thought of my mother lying in that clinic bed, with her face pale and drawn, but still managing a brave smile for my sake, and Mrs. Hawthorne, who had always been there for us, willing to offer help and support without hesitation, woke me up from my own cowardness. They believed in me, and that belief was a lifeline I clung to. The path ahead was uncertain and filled with potential dangers. The palace was a world unknown to me, a place of grandeur but also of hidden perils. I worried about making mistakes, about failing, but I pushed those fears aside. This journey was not just for me, it was for my mother, for our future. And so as the towering walls of the palace finally came into view in the distance, my heart swelled with both anxiety and hope. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and continued on. No matter what awaited me behind those grand walls, I was ready to face it,